Hi folks, today we're going to be looking at a US 2026 Senate election map and making predictions based on polling, political bias, and my own opinions. And sorry if you're one of the 430 people who wanted Hollow Knight, Silksong is out now, so I don't care anymore, we're doing this. To start with, there are a collection of seats that really just aren't that interesting to talk about due to the state's partisan nature. So we'll just go ahead and classify them as safe for one side or another. Now that we have that done, Minnesota is a really interesting state to start with due to its retiring Democratic Senator Tina Smith. On the Democratic side, it looks like a primary between Lieutenant Governor Penny Flanagan and the Congresswoman Angie Craig from Minnesota's second. If I had to place my bets now, I'd say that Penny Flanagan wins the primary and the general election by a likely margin between 5 and 10 points. Minnesota did shift towards the Republicans in 2024, but so did every state. That was a general nationwide trend. I do think Flanagan has the ability to push it back up into a likely state rather than tilt or lean. Alaska is interesting for a few reasons, but because of one main one I'll go over now. The Democratic Congresswoman Mary Peltola, who was unseated in 2024, said she may run for Senate, but has not made a decision yet. However, Tom Begich, the uncle of Representative Nick Begich, who unseated Peltola, previously said that he wouldn't contest Peltola in an election, but he's now running for governor. The fact that this is happening hints that Peltola may end up running in the Senate election. I don't really think this is anything other than an interesting tidbit. I believe that the incumbent, Dan Sullivan, has this locked down, at least for now. Nebraska is one state that you don't hear anyone talking about in the elections just due to its partisan nature. The past few elections have changed that, though. The incumbent and the former governor Pete Ricketts is running, and he'll be facing off against not a Democrat, but the independent candidate Dan Osborne. Osborne ran in the 2024 election, and to many people's surprise, including myself, lost by only 6 points in a state that voted for Trump by a massive margin, 20 to 30 points. I don't remember exactly. I personally believe that Osborne does represent the Democrats' best hope. Does this mean I think he'll win? No, not really. I think Ricketts is stronger than Fisher was, and I think that he really is only going to be able to narrow up to a likely state, like last time. However, it's a very interesting development that we will need to watch closer, especially since we just saw a partisan pollster find Osborne winning against Ricketts 47 to 46. We'll have to see if Osborne can keep up this momentum or if he'll fall to the power of partisanship again. Florida, I really won't spend too much time on because it's not very interesting. Florida has really become out of reach for the Democrats, in my opinion. They're holding an election to replace Marco Rubio's seat, since he's now the Secretary of State, and the acting archivist, and the acting National Security Advisor. The Attorney General is running for the seat, and Democrats really have no one on their bench to challenge her. The next state I want to spend some time on is Texas. Obviously, a lot of time and money has been spent in Texas, but Democrats haven't seen an electoral victory in the state in about 30 years. However, since 2018, they've been trying more. Beto O'Rourke's narrowing of the state to about 2.5 points in the 2018 Senate elections sparked Democrats' interest in Texas potentially being a battleground state. Colin Allred's 2024 run didn't pan out, and he lost by around 8 points. It is interesting to see that he's running again in 2026 while losing by a relatively large margin. However, one point that I think a lot of people miss out on is that Allred outpaced Kamala Harris in the state by about 6 points and the popular vote margin in the country. So while losing by 8 points is obviously not ideal, he did a lot better than I think people give him credit for. What I really want to talk about, though, is the Republican primary, which is shaping up to be possibly the most interesting primary in the country. We have the incumbent Senator John Cornyn running for re-election, with the Lieutenant Governor Ken Paxton entering the race. Paxton is far more of a MAGA Republican than Cornyn is, and thus could suffer some appeal in the general election. Additionally, he has a lot of baggage. He was impeached by the Texas House of Representatives, and he got bailed out in the Senate by his wife. His wife is also now divorcing him on quote-unquote biblical grounds. Paxton right now is leading in the polls by about 4.5 points, and he does look to be the favorite for the primary. This is definitely bad news for the GOP and makes it a more competitive race. Although I still think he would win, he might narrow the state up to being a likely or even lean. So right now I would put it as lean. Cornyn has seen some growth in the state recently, so we really do have to keep an eye on this race. Also, just really quick, I'm not going to talk about Virginia or New Mexico, because while I don't think they are safe for the Democrats, I don't think they are interesting to talk about either. Now we're getting into the really interesting ones. I'll start with Iowa and Ohio. Iowa comes first in the alphabet, so we'll talk about it first. We have a retiring senator, Joni Ernst, who won her last election by 6.5 points. There's been more interest in Iowa from the Democratic side after their massive overperformances in special elections, such as Caitlin Dray winning by 10 points and ending the GOP supermajority in the Iowa Senate. We have a few interesting candidates here, namely State Congressman Josh Turek and Zach Walz, but to me the state is really not screaming blue wave. Unless it is a full wave year, even greater than 2018, I don't see Iowa becoming anything more than lean. Now, as you can see, we have already reached GOP control of the Senate. Since the VP cast the tie-breaking vote, they only need to have 50 seats to control the chamber. Democrats certainly know that this cycle will be hard for them, and I think they recognize that, and are instead aiming to set themselves up for winning in 2028. But we'll have to see how this election goes before making any predictions for 2028. Ohio is next on our plate, and it's another special election, this time to fill VP Vance's seat. The Republican running is John Husted, and for a long time, Democrats were not really thinking about this seat as one they could or should contest. However, in early August, the former Senator Sherrod Brown, who lost his re-election bid in 2024, announced he would be running again. Brown reportedly was going to run for governor, but Chuck Schumer, the Democratic Senate Minority Leader, had a talk with him and really beat him down, I guess. Brown, while I do think he is the best candidate Democrats could hope for in the state, I don't think is going to win. Husted really doesn't have baggage. He's seen more as a moderate Republican. This grants him strength in the general election. And in the latest poll, Husted had a 6-point lead over Brown. While I do think he'll narrow it up to being around 2 to 3 points, I don't think he is going to get an invitation back to DC. So we're left with 4 states now, and these are the ones that most people agree on as the swing states for this election: Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, and Maine. Starting with the least interesting, Georgia, we have the incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff running. If you remember, in 2020, Georgia made national news as it completely overturned its Senate delegation, electing 2 Democrats to the Senate in one night, with Raphael Warnock winning a full term in 2022 by 2.8 points. Ossoff is certainly the favorite to win in this election, enough so that Republicans pretty much lost hope after Georgia Governor Brian Kemp announced that he would not be running for re-election. Kemp was the only Republican who could beat Ossoff in polling, while the other candidates trailed by about 3 to 10 points. The current Republican primary looks like a two-way fight between 2 congressmen, Buddy Carter and Mike Collins. Neither of these candidates are inspiring much hope in Georgia Republicans, so at this point I would rate Georgia as a lean Democratic state with room for growth on either side. North Carolina is a state that, like Texas, Democrats have been eyeing for a long time. Their last electoral victory in the state was in 2008 on both the Senate and presidential levels. While originally the incumbent Tom Tillis was going to run, he dropped out after his no vote on Trump's mega bill. Lara Trump, the president's daughter-in-law, was also looking like she was going to run, but she ended up leaving it on the table. Current front-runner on the Republican side is Michael Whatley, the chair of the Republican National Convention and the former head of the North Carolina Republican Party. On the Democratic side, they have the former governor Roy Cooper. Cooper is incredibly popular in the state, having been involved in politics since the 70s as an assemblyman, then attorney general, then governor. He was possibly the best candidate the Democrats could hope for in the state, and I do think that he will provide their first victory in North Carolina. Michigan, in my opinion, is the state where Democrats can screw up the most. They haven't lost a Senate election there since the 90s, but it's very possible that this may be the one. The biggest issue Democrats have right now is that there's no clear frontrunner. Right now, the primary is between Haley Stevens, the congresswoman from the 11th District, Abdul El Said, the public health director for Wayne County, and the state senator Mallory McMorrow. Of these candidates, Stevens seems to have the best shot at winning the primary due to name ID and electoral history, and she would be facing off against Mike Rogers, the GOP candidate for Michigan Senate in 2024. Polling is fairly scarce, but I believe this might be the most competitive seat in the cycle. I do think Democrats eventually will pull this one out, but I think it is probably going to be under a point. They've seen worrying signs out of Michigan since 2016, but I do think Michigan has one more election for them. The last seat to talk about here is Maine, where incumbent Republican Susan Collins is running for a sixth term. If she was to win the state, she would become the longest serving senator on either side in U.S. history. It's definitely interesting, as it's the only seat where a Republican is running in a state that Trump lost in the 2024 election. While Democrats are hopeful here, Collins is an extremely powerful foe. She won by 6 points in 2020, while Biden won the state by 9. Democrats have had an interesting development here, with Oysterman Graham Plattner running on a platform of democratic socialism. While he is certainly not the establishment's first choice, I believe that Plattner offers much more to potential voters than any of the other candidates so far. However, right now I don't think it's enough to overcome Collins' strength in the seat. I believe that she will hold her seat, but likely between 1 and 2 points. That's all the states, and that's all my predictions, leaving this Senate at 48 for the Democrats and 52 for the Republicans. It isn't that different from the current makeup, and while this is certainly not the election that Democrats would want to see, this would leave them in a good position to win back control in 2028. The last thing I want to talk about is what each party seems to be doing. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, has been privately courting candidates in states like Ohio, North Carolina, Alaska, and Maine. His main goal seems to try to get Republicans to spread their resources thin, and while they don't expect to win every election, they can poke holes and get some through. Instead of focusing heavily on Michigan and Georgia, Republicans now have to worry about Iowa, Nebraska, Ohio, and Maine. Republicans, on the other hand, don't really seem to have much of a strategy. I personally think that they're still riding the high of 2024, and due to the 3-seat cushion they have and the partisan makeup of the map, they aren't particularly worried. We'll have to see if either strategy will pay off. For now, that's it from me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.